course, we still don't know what form Switch Pro will even take. It could just be an upgraded screen and nothing else. Well, that's pretty much what it is, but let's set the stage a little bit. I think expectations got really out of control with the so-called Switch Pro, due in large part to the incessant rumor reporting that we've been seeing for what feels like a year. A lot of that reporting talked about a much more capable Switch with 4K output, then more recently it shifted to potentially taking advantage of Nvidia's revolutionary DLSS, which allows a lower render resolution to be intelligently upscaled with Nvidia's tensor cores. In my experience, recent DLSS releases work phenomenally well on PC, and the technology would be a great fit for Nintendo's clean, cartoonish art styles, not to mention an economical way to reach those higher resolutions. Either way, the picture being painted was a mid-cycle refresh akin to what Sony and Microsoft did last gen with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. I tend to be PC biased and tech focused on this channel, but I really like the Switch, so a beefed up model is certainly something I would be very interested in, and the idea and timing of such a product is logical, but its existence was not a foregone conclusion for me. You see this a lot with gaming stuff, especially Nintendo, where a rumor goes on for so long and in so much detail that it becomes almost an accepted fact, and there's usually some wishful thinking mixed in there as well. Speculation is fine and fun, but when it's taken to that next level, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And this is Nintendo we're talking about. They seldom do what's expected, what people want, what a normal company would do. That's why I found these reports to be dubious at best. Nintendo using DLSS just seemed hard to imagine for me, and as I mentioned in my E3 video, I was prepared for this to be nothing more than a display upgrade, and that's what we ended up with. Despite this new Switch being so straightforward, there's still a lot to talk about here. First off, the whole thing is really bizarre. The way they randomly announced this new hardware on Twitter so soon after E3 indicates to me that Nintendo thought an E3 announcement would be the wrong kind of attention for it, and maybe even detract from their other announcements. After all, the reactions to it have been rather negative, and even though they act aloof, Nintendo surely knew that people were expecting a 4K capable machine. And the real product isn't that, but people's lofty expectations can't be controlled, so they had to do damage control because people expected something that was never promised. At least, that's what I think the explanation for this odd announcement is. It's strategically distanced enough from E3 as to not sour that goodwill, but close enough that they surely could have announced it there if they wanted to. Then the name, Nintendo Switch (OLED model). That is not a great name. In fact, it's not a name at all, and it seems very un-Nintendo-like to have the name of a technology, so meekly encased in parentheses, as the model designation. Nintendo has had some good hardware names. GameCube, 3DS, Switch, and even though it's a Switch that can't switch, bringing back Lite was cool, but when they get it wrong, they get it really wrong, and it's almost like the mistakes are remembered much more than the successes, and those mistakes are mocked for eternity. People still bring up the Wii U's name, and it's often cited as a reason for that system's catastrophic failure. Nintendo Switch (OLED model) is basically Nintendo giving up on names. It's like they're saying, you guys do nothing but make fun of our names, so how about this? We're not even giving you a name this time, fuck you. So what's new with the Nintendo Switch (OLED model? It of course has an OLED screen, which is 7 inches, up from 6.2 on the original. It comes with 64GB of internal storage, up from 32. The dock has been visually refreshed and now has a built-in Ethernet port. The kickstand has been completely redesigned, and it has what Nintendo is calling enhanced audio. The Nvidia Tegra-based internals are identical to the original Switch. No RAM bump, no overclock. It will run games no differently, which is why the reactions have been less than positive. The big upgrade here is obviously the OLED screen. It's still 720p, which on paper looks like a joke in this world of 400 plus pixel per inch devices, but I think it's fine, even with the size increase. This is not a phone. You're not going to read text or watch movies on it. It's just for playing games. And there's a lot of other considerations here, like heat, power use, and battery life, that go into that choice. Remember, these are full quality console grade games. The original Switch's panel quality is not great, especially with that plastic cover, so there's a lot of room for improvement. I don't know if this new one has glass instead of plastic, I sure hope it does, but the shift to a new OLED panel will improve visual quality a lot more than people are giving it credit for. There's more to image quality than resolution, and everything other than resolution should be dramatically improved. Modern OLEDs look extremely good. It'll have vastly improved viewing angles, infinitely better contrast, along with better color reproduction, and hopefully higher brightness. All signs point to this being a Samsung manufactured panel, and they make the best small form factor OLED screens. The only potential downside is burn-in, which should not be an issue for a device like the Switch, where, again, you're spending 90% of your time in games. I was hoping for some improvements in regards to build quality and material choice. Maybe an aluminum chassis, but that doesn't appear to be the case, and it turns out that the physical dimensions are identical to the original Switch, save for an extra 0.1 inches in length. What we do get is this improved stand on the back. The original is a joke. It's like it was designed to be lost or broken. This new one is more like what you'd find on a Microsoft Surface Pro. That, combined with the larger screen in the same body size, makes for a more attractive and modern-looking device with slimmer bezels. The new white color scheme helps to enhance that effect, but they're also offering this in classic neon red and blue, with fresh new vertical packaging to go along with it. The new dock is a lot more attractive too, and that built-in Ethernet port means no more adapter for hardcore Smash players. Nintendo also confirmed that it will be compatible with the standard Switch. The enhanced audio is cool, as the original Switch is not amazing in this regard. But what do people really want? They want Bluetooth audio, because everyone uses wireless headphones now, but it's not there because Nintendo. So all the improvements are handheld only, and let me make myself clear here. They are improvements, notable improvements, and I'm moderately excited about them, but I don't really have any issues with the Switch handheld experience as it stands currently, and I seldom play games on the go. I almost always play at home, and that's where I find the Switch to be lacking in 2021. When the Switch came out, I was still using a 1080p TV, and it was fine, but after getting a 4K TV, the low resolution of docked Switch games has become a source of frustration for me, and it makes the system a lot less attractive. It sounds petty, but I would otherwise be totally gung-ho about Nintendo because they've been so consistent with their games lately, and they just straight up make games in a way that no one else does. For me, it's one of those cases where the tech is holding things back and actively hampers my enjoyment of the games, and it sucks. Every time I get excited about a Nintendo game, it's kind of tarnished by the realization that it's not going to be a great experience on my TV. If you know me, I'm more sensitive and whiny about these kinds of things, but I don't think this is a totally outlandish complaint I have. You'll be hard-pressed to walk into a store or go to an online retailer and buy a new TV that isn't 4K, even at the lower end, and a console that maxes out at 1080p and is usually below that does not look good on a 4K TV. It looks actively bad and detracts from the experience. The real shame is that the kind of games that Nintendo makes are pretty, but let's be honest, they're very simple. It wouldn't take a $500 PS5 or Series X class piece of hardware to get these games running at 1440p or 1800p. Just a high enough resolution to get a good clean upscale to 4K. You can see it with Breath of the Wild emulated at higher resolutions. It looks gorgeous. That's all these games need, nothing crazy. So I understand why people are frustrated. No one wants that higher resolution docked experience more than me, but I think people got too invested in those rumors, and this OLED Switch shouldn't be dismissed as a piece of junk just because it isn't what we wished it would be. What appeals to me about the OLED Switch is that it will now be the best way to play Switch games at home. That sounds weird, but hear out my logic on this one. When you put these 720p games on a 4K TV, it starts making them look worse than they really are. It's just not a good fit. So you then turn to handheld mode where the screen size and resolution is a better pairing, but in my case, I'm going from a nice OLED TV to a rather lackluster LCD with tinny speakers, so it's like half a dozen of one, six of the other. With the OLED Switch, I think the display will be good enough that it will be better to play on it than to have a low-res experience on my big 4K OLED TV, if that makes any sense. The last bit of information to discuss is the price, $350. It's fine, but this probably should have just replaced the standard Switch outright at the same $300 price, because having a lineup with both just makes no sense with such a small price separating them. The standard Switch is 4 years old at this point, so its value has been depreciated, and the OLED Switch is not a new type of Switch offering up a fundamentally different experience. It's an improved version of the original. The release date is October, in time for the holiday season, and I'd wager that despite the backlash, this will be in extreme demand, just like all Switches have been for the past 18 months. Nintendo has tons of momentum right now, and the Switch is well on its way to hitting that elusive 100 million units sold mark. They did not need to shake up the formula with a 4K Switch. Really, they didn't even need to make this OLED model. It's disappointing, you could view it as a complacent move, but as I said at the beginning, this is Nintendo, and a successful Nintendo at that. A 4K mid-cycle refresh is logical, it's clearly what people want, but with Nintendo, you've gotta expect the unexpectable. That this new Switch doesn't bring that higher level of performance clues us into what the future might hold. It's not likely they'll add a fourth 4K Switch to the lineup now, because it wouldn't be released this year, it would be in a year or two, and by then it'll be time to start thinking about a true Switch 2. So it is possible that the rumors about 4K might have been correct, but what was interpreted as being one system was actually two. This OLED refresh and a full-on next-gen system. Since I'm already here and making this video so late, I'll just have some fun and speculate. If a Switch is ever capable of 4K output, I don't think all of the silicon required for that will be housed inside the handheld. A super high-res display is not in the cards, even for Switch 2.0. It's going to take too much to run, too much battery, it's not economical, and it's ultimately unnecessary. I would expect it to be 1080p at most. If the handheld is going to be 1080p, there's no reason to saddle it with a GPU that's capable of 4K output, which, even underclocked, would be a needless drain on battery life and push out a lot of heat. So, what do? You put all the CPU and as much GPU as you need for 1080p inside the handheld, and then make the dock some kind of eGPU unit, like what we see for laptops, and that provides the extra horsepower needed to hit resolutions that are more reasonable for a 4K display. If they wanted to, they could even make this dock an optional Pro thing to keep the Switch cost competitive. In regards to the DLSS rumor, I still have a hard time believing that, but they certainly could put some kind of cut-down Turing or Ampere-derived GPU in that dock with tensor cores for DLSS. Since the CPU remains constant, this would not be fundamentally disruptive for developers. Most would probably keep the same frame rate targets and simply scale resolution. As it stands, all Switch games have two modes, handheld and docked. This is just that, with a higher delta between resolution targets. I do want to point out that my theoretical Pro dock would not be able to bridge the gap between generations. To do an eGPU, you'd need Thunderbolt 3, which is way more throughput than the current Switch's USB-C port has. It's some fun stuff to chew on, but definitely don't play yourself, and I think you shouldn't write off this new OLED Switch just yet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.